I've always been searching for home. Music exists in your heart. It's in the ether. It's sort of like a shelter for the soul that you carry with you. It comes with you everywhere. So in theory, you're always home. I think that's why I chose this path. But the truth is, a lot of times I fall from grace and have to eat my words. People, they ask us, well, why is it taking so long to make your new record? And the answer is this God-forsaken depression. I think I said it earlier in the film, but I wanted this to be about how music saves you. But unfortunately, there's so many parts of the musical infrastructure, the machinery, the mechanics, that have nothing to do with the music. If you're not careful, those parts can erode your soul. Music is a calling, and callings don't come with safety nets.
Hey, what are you doing in my picture?
Are you filming already?
I am.
With no safety nets, you have to be creative and find ways to live on very little money. And that may mean you lose a tooth or two along the way. I mean, you have to be prepared for that sort of thing. Or you may lose a lot more. Or you may be trying to catch up to what you have lost. I like to think that the music is your guide to finding completion, where nothing is lost. Well, that's the idea anyway. If you want it to be true, I think it can be. Honestly, I think that keeping the faith is the work.
Bill Herzog. Being Bill. He hasn't changed.
Put your right foot in, you put your right foot out.
Started recording this record literally a couple days after Ruby died. And it's just loaded on so many levels. So many things have changed in all of our lives since our last record.
Maybe that's This is Bill's job, other job. He goes to kids' birthday parties and
I think a lot of musicians understand you start measuring your life in record years. And well, record years, they're a lot like dog years.
yeah, so I had this cool idea of making a documentary of you and I walking in like all our favorite places in the world talking about technology and how it's kind of fucked everything up. What do you think of that? What do you think of that? Phil's eating his planters. He's got his Gatorade in his back pocket. We're going on a hike.
Stop filming me, man.
For most of my life, I wouldn't get on an airplane. I would take trains cross country to visit my family, but rock and roll was the one thing that would eventually get me to fly. In my mind, that meant I was willing to die for rock and roll. Of course, we couldn't take Ruby on an airplane, but we took her everywhere we could when we'd go on tour. I was about as overprotective as one could ever be. Very hypervigilant. When we'd go on tour, I made out these wills, and they were really elaborate, all kinds of rules and regulations of how, you're meant to take care of her, never leave her unattended, never leave her in a car. Thought of something bad happening to her, if I were gone from this world, was just excruciating, My greatest nightmare was the thought that she could get stolen, We were fortunate because we could bring her on tour sometimes, when it was more like the Western United States, and I would bring someone along to sort of be her wrangler. And there's a really cute story. One time, her caretaker was our friend Lyle, and he must have gone to the bathroom, and we were opening for a band called Sparkle Horse at the Fillmore, and Ruby got up on the stage, and I think that's one of my favorite stories, And the promoter was so sweet, he even put her name on the dressing room. But just having her with us through all those milestones, really, it was just amazing. And of course, she was with us for every record in the studio. She's on every song, and she was there when they were written. How many dogs can say they stood on the stage at the Fillmore, man? When I wrote those wills, I was always in a crazy state of mind because we were always about to leave. But yeah, she must have had 20, and they just got more and more complicated over the years.
And you should point out the old Ballard brick houses. Who knows how long that shit's gonna last before they build dilapidated looking condos. Pretty cool. Pretty damn cool. Who you texting?
And then you just download it into your computer?
Totally. Ah, here we are. Phil with his Starbuck. Woo! Starbuck, motherfucker.
Since I was about 12 years old, I was one of those people that just had to have music playing 24/7 in order to get the strength to really engage in the world. I mean, it goes without saying, music gives you courage. And I think sometimes that, like, parts of me didn't develop. And I don't know, it was just intuitive, but I sort of realized that I needed to experience silence. It's hard to explain, but it just kind of felt like in order to feel the full capacity of my being, I needed to experience life on the backside of music. Does that make sense? It sounds so 101, but of course, when you resonate with yourself and the world around you, you realize there's this whole other life that you could be having outside of this one pursuit. I mean, I guess it makes sense that the pursuit of my own musical endeavor would be extreme. I even starved for rock and roll. I've always been idealistic to a fault, and I've always sought out people who share that same ethos. Which pretty much means sacrificing everything for your band, for your vision. This means money, comfort, potentially not having a family, health, and mental health. It's a variation on not taking the path of least resistance. It's a lot to ask of people. Phil and I were definitely cut from the same cloth when it came to all this sort of stuff. It was just really important to him and I that the band felt like a band, you know? Which in our case meant it felt like family. I don't know, maybe it's pathological. I mean, we were both estranged from our fathers. And Lord knows, like any family, there was a lot of dysfunction. And I'm sure it was really hard to be in a band with Phil and I because we were a couple, you know? I mean, we'd get into some pretty brutal fights. I admit that we're probably not the easiest people to deal with. Most bands have some level of internal friction, but ours could be extreme. I mean, we tried to be those kind of people, you know, like it's all good, but it just backfired. We're still not those kind of people. It would be so much easier if we were. It makes sense to use imagery from France because we were on a French label and we spent a lot of time there. We'd be in these divine places, you know, and I remember at times my heart would just be crumbling because Phil and I were having some kind of relationship meltdown. The good times were so good when we were in Europe that they sort of override any of the darker moments, at least for me. Had I been seeing a shrink in those days, I think they would have said, Jesse, this might be a really toxic relationship. If you have a shrink, sometimes you might just have to tell them to fuck off. I mean, there are relationships that just can't be defined and can't be put into any box. Sometimes the outcome can be worth the struggle. I just believe there are certain forces that we're not in control of, in spite of what we think and what we're told. Phil would come to Iowa to visit Ruby, but we'd also work on songs and started demoing for what's now, a record that we're trying to finish. Thought of him not being in my life and not playing music with him, I feel as if my arms and legs have been severed.
You're just a silhouette right now, which is kind of cool.
Just
You're just
part
a
of my
silhouette.
being is shut off,
Say something interesting.
It really is a beautiful day.
Oh.
Ruby's sleeping at peace.
Music is sacred, and because of that, I have no interest in creating it with just anybody. And that's not to say that just anybody would want to play music with me either. What can I say? I don't want to have a different guitar player in my band, So, sure, I could find someone that might be easier to get along with, but then I think, should this be easy? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. But I suppose the truth is I just need him in my life. With or without the music. I think as a culture, we're becoming just less tolerant of each other. People are so quick to sort of give up on each other, expecting that everyone should be at the same level of evolution on a personal scale, and to arrive into this life fully enlightened. It's just not possible. And I just think complicated people and complicated relationships are frowned upon. Somehow friction is seen as a sickness. But I think the dismissal of complexity and the sticky layers is where the real sickness is, in the dismissal. I guess the truth is we are kind of extreme in that we both have a high tolerance for craziness. What's a 2 for us is probably a 10 for most people. But again, we had similar backgrounds. We came from very painful childhoods, so I just think that there was a lot of empathy for each other, and I think we've always known each other through a kind of microscopic lens. We may have started out as girlfriend and boyfriend, but it became pretty clear to me we were more like cosmic twins. I did get a little encouragement from one shrink about Phil and I. She said, "Well, you always do resolve your conflicts." It's been so many times we've both wanted to walk away. We drive each other nuts. But how do you walk away when you're kind of conjoined at the heart? When you know someone's heart, you know their truth. And that was part of the force that kept us together. People would be like, "You don't need Phil," and people would tell Phil, "You don't need Jesse." But eventually I think we kind of figured it out, and the music became the centerpiece of our life. And of course Ruby, when she entered it, she really bound things together. Off of roses. These are
they're Heather's favorite ones. And we were talking about how, like, in my case with Ruby being dead, I used to take her here, and I feel like when I smell, these ones don't really have a smell. Let's go to one. As if, I don't know, since she's died, she's just in everything. And I smell her, you know, like coming up through the roses. And since it's Memorial Day, I thought it would be fitting to walk along the Walk of Roses and think about Ruby, who used to, on occasion, come to this park. This is beautiful. You could get married under here. It's very beautiful.
Start a whole other project about my childhood just to really convey why I am the way I am, in the sense of sort of being obsessed with telling the story about Ruby. It's sort of, I feel like if I don't tell the story, my life won't make sense. It brings me such joy to come up with new ways to describe how much I loved that dog. This picture's so beautiful because Phil, it's as if he's teaching a child how to swim. Right around the time Ruby came into our life, I remember we were going to break up, but we didn't because of her, you know. For people with kids relate, but watching Phil love that dog so much made me love him more. No, the love of this dog sort of helped me to love Phil unconditionally. While all this loving was going on, it was like the music started to find its way out of us. I had written a friend a letter trying to describe what the missing felt like, and the best description I could come up with was that it was like being pummeled on the inside of your heart with a million little feather hammers. Because she died here in Iowa, there's a part of me that feels like I can never leave. Because she's sort of in the landscape, you know? She's everywhere. Her gentle essence just seems to be sort of mirrored in the sort of bucolic wonder of what Iowa is in its best of moments. I mean, she's everywhere. It's so frustrating, but the audio got corrupted from this section. But I was walking through this prairie, kind of thinking about the mysteries of depression and how one could be surrounded by such beauty and still suffer such great depression. And, you know, all I need to do is come out here and walk among these plants that are all much taller than I am and sort of remind myself of the beauty and the resilience of the tall grass prairie. And it really helps. So they say when you suffer depression, your world becomes smaller. But what they don't tell you is maybe your world needs to become smaller. In my case, that's what needed to happen. And I didn't even want a digital trace, but that's near impossible. But what does it mean to disappear in this era? I mean, what does it mean? You can live in a remote area, be in the middle of the country like I am, and in the middle of a
makes me truly happy when I'm out.
prairie remnant, and you're still connected. It's hard to disappear. And there's always some email or some message, or some of my biggest falls from grace are sort of triggered from looking at the Facebook pipeline. I work so hard to protect myself. The problem with the internet is even if you're not accessing it, you know it's still there. It changes the temperament of everything. I don't know, I just started associating music with Apple commercials and laptops and, you know, products and branding. I just can't really receive my music through the same portal that so much bad news comes through, you know? It's dangerous for me. I just feel like it keeps me from accessing the wonder that's really there in the natural world. I mean, sometimes you start thinking in Facebook, you'll be out and you're actually thinking of what you saw on your screen, you know? It's just really dark. We were never meant to know what hundreds of people were thinking at one time, and the pipeline on Facebook is just such an unnatural state to be in. It causes this disharmony that's very sorrowful. Keeping up appearances comes at a cost. I remember I was at one of my low points after my dog Ruby died, and I was at my mom's in Seattle, and I was borrowing her laptop, and I'd sort of exhausted every possible Google search, you know? It's just one of those things where you're like, I should not be on the computer right now because I'm clearly trying to fill some endless void. But it occurred to me at one moment that I was sort of using it more like a Ouija board or some magic 8-ball. I mean, I was literally Googling my dead dog.
Look at you. No one will hit him. Who does he belong to? Sons. Oh, you are so amazing. But you shouldn't be in the middle of the... Are you happy now?
I got my spicy chicken.
So yeah, I just needed to disappear for a while. I really believe our souls kind of come and go at their own volition, and the seasons kind of morphed into one long season, and before I knew it, years had gone by, but I needed to wait for my soul to return. While I waited for my soul to return, I loosened the grip on everything. I didn't fight so hard to keep it together, and it all fell apart. Things had become so chaotic, and I remember I started praying for stillness, and my prayers got answered because I was all about stillness. I had fallen in love with a scientist that studied birds, and that's what brought me to Iowa. And the band was touring a lot at the time, so I felt that, you know, we were at a point in our career that I could live anywhere and, you know, still keep the ball rolling. There was a lot of back and forth. Phil would come to Iowa to visit Ruby. I'd go to Seattle. We'd rehearse and go out on the road. Phil and I ended our 10-year relationship while we were working on new material for Marble Sun, our last record. When the record was finally done and came out, we lost our longest standing member, Bill Herzog. He became a father, and he just couldn't tour anymore. So Bill was the last of the original lineup to leave the band, and I think at this point all our original ex-bandmates are parents now. It was always a huge blow to the heart and soul when anyone left, and it was something I always dreaded but kind of knew was inevitable. I mean, it's usually the nature of bands, unless you're U2 or the Rolling Stones, you know. But it was hard even when it were, you know, losing people who just played one tour with us. I would just become so attached and just wanted it to go on forever. And I suppose in some realm it does go on forever. Taking all emotions out of the equation, it was just a really exciting time musically because I felt the band had finally sort of reached that level where we were firing on all cylinders and we were starting to become the band that I think we were always meant to become. So from that standpoint, we were just beginning, and it was really exciting. At the door, brought shadows for your flowers. So Bill left and the show had to go on, so we got a new bass player and carried on. It's amazing Marble Sun ever saw the light of day because while we were breaking up and working on new material for it, we couldn't even be in the same room as each other. I mean, it was crazy. I think we captured that direness on the record. I remember this song, Pleasuring the Divine, it was written in like 5 minutes in this just fury and rage, and I don't know how we pulled it off. It's one of my favorite songs to this day, but I just remember him storming out of the apartment, and I didn't see him for a couple weeks after that. And I remember thinking, oh God, it might be the end, you know. On the day we started having this band, I was always worried it was the end. Having a band was the perfect place for my abandonment issues to manifest. But sadly, this was our last tour with this incarnation and with a full band. There had been a lot of friction on that tour. But I don't think the music suffered. I think it made us better. I know people don't want to hear that, but I think all of our records have been sort of delivered under duress. There's always this sense that things are falling apart. People always say, are you having fun in the studio? And I never quite understood that. I mean, of course it's the one place I'd rather be than anywhere else. It's like I'm in bliss on some level. But at the other end of it, sometimes in the moment you have no way of knowing if you've gotten it right. And you don't always get it right. And there's just something so jarring and disconcerting about the potential of your soul manifesting wrong. And for me, that can send me down a dark slope, you know, and I wish it was different, but it's just the way it is. Of course, what you think is wrong in the moment may be, you know, exactly the way things are meant to be. It can take a while for your conscious mind to catch up with what your soul sounds like. I mean, you're trying to create this sonic replica. There are times something I just hated, I'll later think is the most beautiful thing ever. It's a mind fuck. I mean, of course, sometimes you have fun in the studio, but I'm still reluctant to define it as fun. And to think there's not just a little trauma while a part of you is being born and maybe a little part of you is dying seems like an oversimplification to call it fun. We were really fortunate and we did well in Europe, and our hotel rooms reflected that. Instead of jamming 4 or 5 adults into one motel room like we had to do in the States, everybody was paired off and they got their own beds, and I didn't have to feel like I was torturing anybody by having grown men share beds, you know. Hell, sometimes you even got your own hotel room. But, you know, I always joke that maybe I became a musician just so I could sleep in a room with 5 people. I think on some level the security and the, you know, just the camaraderie was something that I was sort of, you know, I was in my element, and as much as I'm sure I could be, you know, a total jerk at times, like, you know, under these situations with no sleep and what have you, I loved it. But yeah, I mean, I was kind of torturing everybody, expecting that they were all going to grow old with me, that we'd all still be sharing the same hotel room into our 90s, you know. Sleep deprivation's definitely the hardest thing about touring. Right around the time things fell apart, you know, I was having my own doubts and kind of questioning if I could carry on, you know, physiologically. I mean, can I still do this? There were times I felt like I was just going to roll over in my bed and my heart was going to stop. Exhaustion can kill you. The good times just make you forget the discomfort. We tried to create the band so that people could come and go, and that, you know, ultimately it was Phil and I. But it's just never that simple, and you can't really quantify these things in terms of how important each person's role was. Even though at the time Phil and I claimed that we were going to continue on, and it still felt like it was over. And it was. I mean, it was a, you know, it was going to have to be rebuilt completely. It's taken me 5 years to be able to pass a hotel or a motel or even ride on the highway without my heart just sinking and longing and being haunted, you know. And I would just sort of look for our van, you know, in the corner of my eye, or I'd hear its hum, that tone just from the highway, you know, and I just felt like a ghost. I felt abandoned, but I also felt like I'd abandoned Phil. It was a very confusing feeling because there's no separation between music and living. Well, living kind of became a trigger. I mean, everything I associated with the band. Because I was already in a major depression when Ruby died, well, you know, what descended on me was epic. The only solace I really had was nature and the hopes that, I would pull out of it. But music just wasn't there at the time to save me. Music just brought me further, deeper into despair, frankly. It just reminded me of what I'd once had and how full my life had been. I don't think most people would have catastrophized this the way that I did. They probably would have bounced back and remained on course. But I think for me, my 20s and 30s were spent never standing still and just pursuing music without ever taking a breath. And what happened was, when it all just kind of abruptly stopped, all these past wounds, I mean, wounds from my childhood, had a chance to surface. And I think it was, it was the big one. My guess is it would come as a surprise to my bandmates how hard it hit me, how dark it got. Nobody would have known because I just kind of disappeared. And again, of course, there was always that nagging question, did they leave or did I leave? All I knew is that I was 44 years old and I couldn't see the future. Like I said, music itself was a trigger. I mean, music brought me actual pain. In order to write songs, I mean, you have to believe in the future. You have to have some kind of faith. Music was always what saved me, but now it was the one thing that it just represented loss and failure. 2, 3, 2, 2, 3.
My heart is heavy, but my heart is true. But my truth means nothing, but it means for me and you. And on a good day you might see me cry, but I will never pass you by. The children are singing, the words fill the air. The orchard is empty, but they don't seem to care. And feathers fall down from the sky, and I will never pass you by.
If Phil and I did one thing right, it's that the band did feel like a family. So call me crazy, I lost my family. And man, it hurt.
That I need to change. I sleep through the sunshine, I weather the rain.
So while I took the time to mourn the loss of my band, Ruby had gotten old, and that presented another problem because I wasn't going to leave her side. So things really slowed down.
Oh, but all is forgiven today on this earth, and feathers are falling from the sky in my dream. And all is forgiven today on this earth, and feathers keep on falling from the sky in my dream. From the sky in my dream, on this land.
Some things are just so beautiful, it brings me to my knees. Even an abandoned Little League field, just something about the residue of people's emotions, I suppose, that I feel. I'm always in awe, always. But I've always been torn between wanting complete isolation, wanting to be right in the fire, right in the midst of things. As soon as I think I've reconciled this, something will tug at me, and I'm sort of at its mercy. I've come to the conclusion that all you can do is surrender.